welcome to the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. How about everybody tonight? Wonderful. I am Greg Gorga, Executive Director of your Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. So happy to be here. Want to welcome you to our talk tonight, Catalina Island Conservancy, 50 Years of Island Stewardship, and I Look Forward by Tony Budrovich. And you are in for a treat. He's a great guy. I had dinner with him last night, and he knows a lot about the island, and it's going to be a great talk. I want to thank, of course, our lecture series sponsor, Marie Morris Rowe. Yes, let's hear it for Marie. She is healing and doing better, and I'm hoping she's here for our next month's lecture. And she has sponsored this lecture series for the next 5 years, so it's really, it does deserve another applause. So Tony served as the Catalina Island Conservancy's Chief Operating Officer prior to becoming President and Chief Executive in 2016. In his current position, he leads the Conservancy in the accomplishment of its stated mission to be a responsible steward of its lands through a balance of conservation, education, and recreation. In addition to managing the 42,000 acres of wildlands, a botanic garden, 2 nature centers, an airport, and a complex infrastructure including over 20 facilities, maintenance shops, housing, 200 miles of roads, 170 miles of trails, camps, and 60 miles of coastline and coast throughout Catalina Island. And I thought I had a hard job here. He is also in Buffalo, Bison, actually. He has overseen the Conservancy's first capital campaign, which reached its goal of raising $17 million for island projects. Initiatives of the campaign included the Trails Expansion Project, construction of the organization's new state-of-the-art and LEED certified Trailhead Visitor Center located in the downtown area of Avalon, and construction of the new Ace Clearwater Airfield. Tony has worked with Southern California Edison to secure $300,000 for the airport solar project due to be installed in 2023. He joined the Conservancy after 18 years as the Deputy Director of California Science Center and Senior Vice President of the California Science Center Foundation, where among other accomplishments, he led the construction of the Space Shuttle Endeavour exhibit. And it was really cool. When I moved there, I remember seeing it on its way. So please join me in welcoming Tony Budrovich.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you and be here tonight. Also, we have a lot of connections to Santa Barbara and Catalina Island. And joining us, I just saw them a moment ago, are actually Wrigley family members. So I have 2 board members here, Allison Wrigley-Rusak. I have Austin Rusak, who was just there a minute ago, and former board member Jeff Rusak. And they live up here in Santa Barbara. They spent a lot of time on Catalina Island, but it always adds that era of they know more history than I do, so now my presentation has to be more careful. As we move forward here, overview of the Conservancy. In 1972, 50 years ago in July, we were started by the Wrigley family, the Ofields, and the Island Company. They basically decided to preserve the land and make it a special place, and I really have to say positive things about Mr. Wrigley. He had a lot of vision, just setting up sort of to be ecologically sound, to worry about the geology, the natural history, and the accessibility. That was a big thing back then, that it's always a mix to sort of push conservation, but at the same time say, hey, but everyone's welcome. Please come to Catalina. So that's kind of the mix of what he started, and we keep moving forward from that moment. This happy picture is the day that they signed the agreement to start the Conservancy. So again, that's Mr. Wrigley at the table. Dorothy Ofield was to his side, and that started what we were doing. They did a little bit of a test, sort of seeing if the idea of conservation was going to be a benefit to the island. And so for a couple of years, we were doing work on the island before the land was actually turned over to us. And then in 1975, the group turned the 42,000 acres over to the Conservancy. The Articles of Incorporation, I just thought some of these things were worth noting. It's to operate a nature preserve. That was one of the statements that was in that document. To preserve native plants and animals, biotic communities, geological and geographical formations, of educational interest, as well as open space lands used solely for the enjoyment of scenic beauty. To promote and study ecology, including terrestrial and aquatic ecology, natural history, archaeology, and conservation. Now remember, this was written in '72. These words weren't common. Ecology wasn't a word used every day back then, so I was really proud of the fact that he was just such a forward thinker. And then we promote ecologically sound approaches to recreational and educational use of the property, and the general public, scientists, and others. So that's sort of why we're there. And I actually go back to this sustaining document as to how we run the Conservancy every day. We do have some Wrigley family members, one of which doesn't start till January, which is the second one there, Kaylin. But these are family members that are still in the board. They still treasure the island. They're there actively. They're there to be helpful. And I see them all throughout the year. Again, Jeff and Allison probably spend more time on Catalina Island these days than they do in Santa Barbara, just because of he's actually running the island company, the largest employer and largest company on Catalina Island. Conservancy history. So for that, I'm going to grab a piece of paper to help my reading ability. Going all the way back to 1542, that's more than the 50 years, but the original finder of the island as a sailor was Juan Cabrillo. So you probably know that. He came by there, made a visit. More Europeans came to the island in years to come after. Mexico decided in 1946 to start to release the land and sell the land. In 1987, a guy named George Sherratt, I'm saying it wrong, George Shadow, Jeff, you're going to probably have to do this presentation soon. George Shadow kind of visioned what this island can be from a recreational standpoint, how to use it and that type of thing. In 1991, the Banning family was into shipping, and they said, here's an opportunity to fill our boats. So they got involved. In 1919, Mr. Wrigley bought the island, and that's really, they're still with it, they're working every day on it. And then in 1972, started the Conservancy. In 1975, the land gift was given to the Conservancy. In 1980, we started bald eagle restoration. Many of you have heard about the DDT in the channel. Eggs were cracking before hatching. So we ended up, and we are still actively involved with the bald eagle restoration on the island. In 1983, we started our actual education department. That's where it got to 2 whole people, and it's grown substantially since then. We are the science teachers of the classroom students of Avalon. So of the 740 children that go to Avalon School, at every grade level from kindergarten through 12th, we go into those classrooms and give their science classes, and we try to get at least one day in the field at every grade level. So one of the things the Conservancy does is sort of give back to the local community. In 1987, we started the Native Plant Nursery, a way for us to grow plants that are uniquely and ideally suited for Catalina Island. And one of the things in this changing, warming, drying environment is we're spending a lot of energy putting plants back on the island so that they can be successful. We're not changing nature, but we're going to some of the shaded valleys and some of the moist crevices of the island, and we're putting about 1,000 trees into the ground every year, all trees that had origination from the island. And we also put in about 1,000 bushes. So the whole idea is you start the shade with the tree, and you come in with the understory, and that's the promotion of basically anything from plants, animals, and invertebrates that live within them or under them. In 1994, we started our recreation department, basically getting into the eco-tour business, being more formally in the trail business, and working with a partnership with the island company related to Island Recreation Enterprises, which runs campsites and other remote boat-in campsites around the island. I'll show you those in a moment. Our biggest fundraiser started in 1996. We call it the Conservancy Ball. If you've ever been to Catalina, I hope most of you have, or multiple times, I should say. In the casino, which is sitting at the entrance to the harbor, and you see it from all over the city of Avalon. We have a beautiful ball in that space every year, and it's upstairs with views of the harbor, and it reminds me of the days my parents, as a child, left the house twice, and I've only had a babysitter twice when I was young. Both times because they got on the steamboat, danced their way to Catalina, went to the casino, danced all night, and then came back the next day and were too tired for me. So that was my extent of getting a little free time, were those 2 nights. Also in '96, the Wrigley Memorial and Botanic Garden were gifted to the Conservancy from the Garden Foundation, which was also a combination of many of the Wrigley family members and Island Company members. In 1999, we decided to make a bold move and eliminate the goats and pigs on the island. It's something that a few people cherished, but in the same extent, we knew we could never save the plants of the island, and we could never save the topsoil. Now, one of the things to remember when you're talking about island ecology, without topsoil, nothing stays healthy. And so the more the goats and pigs, goats eat the shrub to the ground and pigs eat the roots. So we had to do something to sort of bring the island back. And our before and after pictures, I don't have a lot here, but when you get involved with our conservation department, you'll see it's dramatically different. We're making a big difference on the island. In 1999, we also had an issue with the Catalina Island fox, where we ended up having a canine distemper get into the Catalina Island fox. Because the word canine was in it, for years people sort of hated dogs being on the island and off-leash dogs and all that. An ongoing problem that's actually more prevalent today than it was back then is raccoons. Raccoons love to sneak on boats. If you have a boat in LA Harbor, high likelihood you're going to have a visitor of a raccoon. And so we now send 2 people for 4 days every year just to put signage on all the boats in San Pedro, Wilmington harbors to remind them to look for raccoons under their chain lockers or under a piece of canvas or whatever, because these passengers will get to the island and then they say, "Ooh, I'm close to land," and they'll jump. And we don't want them on the island. They're very harmful to the island. Remember, we don't have a lot of the invasive animals. We don't have bobcats. We don't have raccoons. We don't have a whole lot of things that would do damage to that island. We want to keep it a healthy island. In 2003 and 4, we shipped about 250 bison off the island to South Dakota to basically repatriate some animals to the Native Americans that cherished the idea that they could get these bison that came from Catalina. So prior to the beginning of the Conservancy, a movie was filmed on the island. It was a Zane Grey movie. Some bison were brought over. It didn't make the final cut of the movie, but those bison ended up meandering onto the land. They were very hard to capture. And so the idea was, well, just leave them there. They'll be fine. And suddenly we had 500 bison on the island. It didn't take long. So in 2007, we do a symposium, an annual review of sort of what our conservation department is achieving, just so people get to see that type of thing. In 2009, we started bison contraception. So rather than have to ship hundreds of animals off the island, the theory was, let's try to keep a good population. We did some scientific studies. We found out that, hey, maybe 250 animals would be the right number of bison for the island. Now remember, bison eat invasive grasses. So they're not hurting the island the way you would think they were. They also don't get to eat hay and alfalfa. We don't grow it on the island. And back in the old cattle days, the Conservancy spent a lot of hours getting rid of hay and alfalfa that used to sneak back in through some of the fields across the island because we considered it an invasive grass. The bison contraception was probably too effective. At the time, our staff was thinking they were doing the right thing, and all the girls ended up getting the contraception. Normally in a scientific study, you keep about 30% of the population unvaccinated. Communications and control, but now that I've gone back and met with the drug maker and things like that, they wished we had kept a separated population. We haven't had a baby on the island for nearly 10 years. So we're at that point where the board has authorized us to bring a few bison back to the island. We'll do that, and believe me, they'll populate quickly once they get there. But we have about 95 on the island as we speak. So there's still a good population, and if you take one of the eco tours, probably the first thing people ask is, hey, can I go out and see a bison? More than they want to learn about plants and animals and beautiful coastlines, people like that domestic bison, which was enhanced when President Obama named it one of the national mammals. So it adds more to the whole story. In 2015, we started our first capital campaign. Actually, Greg mentioned it. And it started at $11 million. In 2012, we did our first strategic vision called Imagine Catalina. It was a dreaming vision. We had the board and the staff together and everyone came up with ideas. It was not all doable, but there was a lot of value within that Imagine Catalina campaign, and we still use many of those pieces to drive us forward. In 2017, we opened up another 15 miles of trail. We called it Trekking Catalina. We also put 7 restrooms on the island. So my first year with the Conservancy, I lived on the island 7 days a week. Very seldom did I leave. And I hiked every weekend because I said, hey, I got this great job. I should actually not sit in an office all day. So every weekend I would go out. And sadly, wherever I would hike, I'd see a lot of white flowers, which I later learned to be toilet paper. So one of the things I really push for is we've got to get restrooms in these remote locations. So when a hiker is going miles across the island, Jeff, you went all the way across the island, I believe. When you do that super tough hike, and Catalina is just like the hills here in Santa Barbara, straight up, straight down, but the best view ever when you get to the top. So it's a lot of work, but now we have 7 restrooms across the island in our remote locations. We opened a volunteer camp at Blackjack. That was a way for us to get volunteers. It's amazing how many people want to get muddy, dirty, and dusty and climb into a cavern in the middle of the night and count bats, just to see what our bat population is doing. Austin just was on the island counting deer, because every year we count how many mule deer we have on the island to make sure there's a balance between what damage is being done to the plants and the animals there. So we have all these sort of projects, anything from pulling a weed to removing a fence, and so our volunteers are super special to us. 2018, the Ace Clearwater Airfield was completed. That was a airfield, and I was meeting your chair of the board last night, and she flew into the airfield and didn't like the hump and didn't like the fact that it was at 2,600 feet. But in the same extent, if you own a DC-3, which Mr. Wrigley did at the time, that hump was absolutely beneficial to the fact that it slowed the plane down before he hit the other side. And we've done some things to make it a little less risk-oriented, is that now we warn people how many feet are left at a runway and things like that. So originally you used to get to it, and because of the hump in the middle, you thought you were at the end of the runway, and quite frankly, you still had another half. So anyway, airfield's doing great, and during COVID, our airfield is busier than ever. People love the fact if you live in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, wherever, it's a reasonably short drive when gas is expensive, but it's a total getaway. And that's kind of the way the whole city of Avalon operates. It's a release from everyday life, which was actually what it was intended for as it's got set up. In 2019, we opened our featured building in downtown called the Trailhead. Trailheads are the beginning of kind of all action when you're a hiker, camper, that type of thing. We now do 290,000 people through a building that we did 26,000 people in our old building. Transformational change of how we get our story out there. And the idea is we don't want to take business away from the city of Avalon. That's a completely different visitor. But when you come to Avalon in a pair of shorts and open-toed shoes, we want them to know how the next time they come to the island, how to use that island. So we end up giving a lot of information about how to get on an eco-tour, how to come to the island, how to stay on the island, how to walk across the island, how to learn geology, learn birding, how to go to a remote beach and be the only person on a beach. As Greg mentioned, we have 62 miles of beach that no one else sits on but you. It's pretty special. IT resiliency, something that we started right in January of 2020. And guess what? COVID hit. If we did not have an ability to send our people home and keep working, we would have been very unlucky. So we had really good timing to start sort of our improvement in our IT infrastructure, which we're continuing to work on today. In 2021, we started a DEAI policy. Many of you know that's an important step forward for organizations these days. We started also this last year, we had our first strategic plan built, sort of a 20-year look of where we're headed with conservation and where we're headed with education. Later this year, we'll actually sign off on a recreational plan. So our 3 mission-related areas, conservation, education, recreation, will have a strategic plan moving us forward. And then the last part of that is we're looking to write a strategic plan for the overall conservancy, not only the 3 mission-related areas, but what is the overall company working on? And the board's actively involved in that one, and we'll be having a first retreat since I came to the company, getting everyone's head in a room and trying to see what we're going to move forward with directions and thoughts. As we go through there are some beautiful pictures of Catalina. So here's the contrasting dry grass next to the beautiful blue ocean. Always nice to see. We are absolutely trying to solve the problems moving forward of how do we make a sustainable island. Again, less water than ever dropping, more heat on the island than ever. We had a really good year on water where it was staying cool and we had a great kelp bloom. And then we hit 76 degrees just last week. So we had basically about a 7-degree climb in water temperature. Guess what happens to kelp once you pass 74? It doesn't do well, especially the giant kelp. So we really want to work on that balance and try to do things to sustain at least the plant side of the island. And the reason for that is our watersheds drain into the ocean. So if we don't protect the topsoil and keep it on the island, we ruin the marine environment around the island. It's a symbiotic relationship for sure. Other things that are on that is we're continuing to work on our plants. I mentioned that we're continuing our plant process. And then we're also just trying to be a timeless place with an endless purpose. So this is something we came up as sort of our 50th anniversary tagline, but we thought it really captured what the Conservancy is trying to do, which is treasure all that great history. And the island company I mentioned has been spending millions of dollars kind of rebuilding the infrastructure of the hotels, the restaurants, and cleaning things up and keeping them going so that every visitor that comes there gets a great experience. It was wonderful 100 years ago. It's going to be wonderful in 100 years from now. But we have to keep the island moving the same direction. Again, another picture, one of our rangers shot. So we have a few rangers that meander the island just to make sure campers are safe. They kind of are the Smokey the Bear of our group, and they make sure people have water, people are doing logical things. If you're riding a bike, you're wearing a helmet, because it's a giant rock. I mean, there's not a lot of topsoil on Catalina Island, so you have to keep people safe when they're hiking it. Who is on Catalina Island? Well, I mentioned to you the island company. They're the largest employer. They have a lot of the hotels and restaurants and businesses and other recreational opportunities on the island. On the island also, the city of Avalon. So in Avalon, it actually has its own city government. Out at the west end of the island, the USC Wrigley Marine Institute operates. It's at Big Fisherman Cove. It's an offshoot of USC where they do a lot of environmental education and marine ecology work. Southern California Edison, the only place Edison supplies power, gas, and water. We know that because they're not always great at the gas and water side, but they try hard. And anyway, we're getting through it. We do have 2 active desalinators on the island that is absolutely beneficial to everything we do on the island. As a guy worried about the island's health, the groundwater is so critically important to keeping that island healthy, and so the desalinators make me sleep much better at night. And then the Catalina Express, that's the majority of the people that come to the island, about 1.1 million people every year. This year we're going to set a record probably much higher than that, but that's how most people get to the island. Boaters, we love boaters because they normally get to the island, have a couple days of not a lot to do, so what do? They walk on our island. And they do exactly what we want. Accessibly learn it, understand it, ask questions, get more involved. So our boating audience has been great for the Conservancy. Showing you what 42,000 acres looks like, 8 miles across, 22.3 miles long. That's Catalina Island. What you see in green is what the Conservancy worries about. So as you see, most of the island is what the Conservancy worries about. If you see the orange or rust sections, that's what the island company continues to worry about. There's a private residence in the middle of the island, El Rancho Escondido, a fantastic facility that I just got to visit. And they grow some Rusack wine there, and they have some stables where Arabian horses may come back soon. And it's just a long-term family sort of heritage situation where Mr. Wrigley, who always worked the 100-hour week, used to go every August and take a vacation with the family. And you'll be lucky to see it in your next visit. Properties and activities. Let me move to the next one. So just talking about some of the things the Conservancy has. We mentioned the airport. We mentioned 200 miles of road, 140 miles of trail. We have a nature center. We have our Trailhead Visitor Center. We have trouble hiring employees because we can't find housing. So we have basically 38 housing units. Some are apartments, some are buildings. Odd for an employer to have to do that, but in the island, it's a limited place. And if you want great employees, you got to give them a place to live. Leased areas, we do show some areas around it where we have anything from yacht clubs to youth camps to educational camps to religious camps and to Boy Scouts. So we have a variety of spots that are highly active, and they bring about 330,000 people to the island every year that mostly don't go through Avalon. They mostly go directly to the camp by independent boats. Again, island company property. There are a variety of things that they run. I'm not going to go into the detail, but the majority of the business aspects of the island are controlled and operated with the island company. Boat-in camps. If you're a boater, you may be interested to know that you can go have your own beach and basically set a anchor and go ashore, and all of the places where we show the little tents, that's a place you can legally stay as a renter and have a place that you see no one else. You want to read a great book? Nothing better than the side of Catalina where the ocean's blue, the water's warm, and the views are stupendous. So we have moorings all the way around the island. We operate that in a joint venture. We have a variety of key things that we worry about. You've heard me say it 3 times already, but we worry about conservation, we worry about education, and we worry about recreation. Our vision statement, I found value in that. It inspires a lifetime of exploration and stewardship of the natural and cultural world by encouraging experiences with the wild that deepen understanding of the connection between nature and self. We preserve and restore the environment on Catalina, promoting and modeling ecologically sustainable communities to create a healthier future for the island and the earth. How we're funded. So the Conservancy's doing well. We did even better during COVID. Our fundraising went up, but the majority of the money that we have on our bottom line, and we're very lucky the way the organization was put together, but our earned income is our second biggest. Our donations are our third biggest. Our principal money comes in through, I'm sorry, I said that the wrong way. Our rentals on the earned income side is where most of our money comes in. So the properties that we rent, anything from communications towers to the camps and that type of thing, that's the vast majority of where our money comes from. We are growing our donations. That's an area that I expect in the next few years we should be able to double. And that's only because we just haven't dug deep enough to get to know the people that visit that island. And most people who visit the island cherish it for some experience, some moment, and we think there's a great opportunity to connect them to say, hey, keep the island healthy for your next generation and for the people that are coming in the future. We do have an endowment that does help us fund a few of our positions. Our education group, like I said, we're in the classroom, we're in the field. We work on everything from college down to kindergarten. So we have vans that take people out into the field. Most of the college students do a project for us. Now we have a lot of PhD students who use Catalina Island as a living laboratory. So we have a lot of valuable research taking place there. We always keep a copy so that our files grow, but in the same extent, it's just a wonderful spot because it's open and not touched for most of the island. It's just open space is hard to find. Every last Friday of every month, we do a lecture series. It's online, so whether you're in Santa Barbara, whatever, if you want to learn valuable information about our Channel Island, but it always relates to all the other Channel Islands. Our lecture series has great topics. Naturalist training, we end up doing naturalist training both online and in person, but I know we've had the Navy, we've had people from Santa Cruz, we've had people up and down the coast visit our naturalist training just to get an overview. Interpretive education, we have signage around the island, so if you're hiking, walking, and that type of thing, you are able to sort of catch some educational content when you're looking at the beauty that surrounds it. In recreation, hiking and biking are probably the two most popular things. We have a lot of birding, a lot of geologists that come to the island. Remember, Catalina Island is tectonic plates that got crushed together, so deep-rooted soils came to the surface. And so one of our past board chairs, who's a geologist and just a great guy, he said what fascinated him about the island, he would find things at the surface that they studied to be 1,000 feet into the soil. And it just always made him kind of say, wow, this is such a great spot. And that's why so many universities come to the island, because it's unique. Boating is another big recreational activity around the island. Our conservation group, we take invasive plants out. We put native plants back. If you do it in the wrong order, it doesn't help you. So we have to get rid of the invasives so that the other plant does not compete. We have a native plant nursery where we end up growing a couple thousand plants a year. About 1,000 of those we try to sell within the community. About 500 we sell in the community, about 1,500 we put on the island every year. The Catalina Island Fox Recovery, I mentioned to you that it had a terrible moment in 1999. We are back at full capability now. The island fox is over 2,000, doing great. The only reason we always have to worry is because we do have that 1.1 million visitors. Always a chance that something could get reintroduced. So we're out there monitoring foxes every week of our life. We have bison on the island. For those of you that know them, they're a little smaller in size and stature than bison in other areas, but these bison have bloodlines back to Yellowstone. These bison came from a variety of locations. But they're absolutely the reason people love to take those inland tours, just to see a herd of bison walking across the open plains of Catalina is wonderful. The bald eagle, so we have 6 breeding pairs on the island right now, and I heard a statistic that nearly 70% of all bald eagles in California have bloodlines back to Catalina. We were absolutely pivotal, as was Santa Cruz and some other islands, for bringing the bald eagle back. So great success story there. This is actually a bat monitor. So this little device listens and monitors through infrared wave what bats are going by. We found 2 species this year we did not know existed on the island. So we thought there were 6, now we think there's 8. We caught them in a mist net, which is a very high net. The bat drops in, the scientists tag it, do some research on it, and then release it. So we're working with 2 universities on our bat story right now, which is really good in a drying world that bats are surviving, and they're doing better on the island because there's a variety of disease hitting bats on the mainland these days. We have 6 major university partners. We have many other universities we partnership, but Cal State Long Beach, we probably have the most students coming over from. They're a local university. Colorado State, we're doing some new work with. Stanford is a group that's just because of the Woods Institute and other groups really fascinated with what happens on the island. USC Wrigley and USC in general. Arizona State University, these are the groups that come with sometimes 20, 30 students and just do their educational projects or their PhD work on our island. Because our anniversary is 50 years, we tried to get a little groovy in our look, but that was sort of the look of our Conservancy Ball or invitation. And anyway, it's just celebrating our 50 years was a great time, and we got to have sort of a triumphant afternoon at El Rancho Escondido for a small group of people that got to have a special moment, sort of seeing the island in the middle and driving there and back. We do a lot of fundraising events and special events in a way to engage people. Our Conservancy Times comes out twice a year. I think it's a great magazine, always teaching, but at the same extent just informing and making it kind of fun. We have a great trail map that talks about anywhere there's a restroom, a drinking fountain. It tells you the grade of every walkway you can take, and it tells you what you can walk on and what you can't. So always a great thing to have when you're walking the island. External communications, we do the same thing most people do. Most of our TV and film comes to us because people want to film Catalina. We are not an active marketer because we just don't have that return. But the Island Company, the Catalina Express, they're active marketers, so you'll see Catalina ads now and then. And our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are growing. Membership, so we have a variety of members. We have members that give us $25,000 a year. We have some board members that give even more. We have some people that give us $35 a year. The goal is to connect so that we can do good things to the island. That's really why we try to grow our membership base. We have a lot of facilities. No reason to really go over that again. Airport in the sky. I actually just noticed yesterday that I have the wrong picture here. This is a picture, for those of you that have ever flown in, and Jeff, you're here, I know you've flown in, but this is the asphalt runway that predates the work we did. So we did a project with the Marines, and we found out that the Marines had not actively, no one in the military had built a runway in recent years. Everyone who had done that had retired out. And whether it's humanitarian or war or whatever, it was really important for the Marines to be ready for anything. And so we talked to 3 divisions, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. The Marines took the project. It's called an IRT, Innovative Readiness Training. And Jeff, I know you had a dinner up at, Point Magoo, trying to get that started. I had heard about it from a visiting Marine and said, here's an opportunity to save some money. So what in turn happens, the Marine do all the work. They come with their own grub, their own housing, and they bring them to the island with their own transportation. So the only thing the Conservancy paid for was the product that went to build that runway. Everything else was free. So 2/3 of the cost got wiped off the table. Fantastic way to build a runway. We did that project again on roads. So we did about 6 miles of roads and coverts, which is drainage devices, leveling some roads and making them more sustainable, again, using the Marines. And they walked away just loving the experience, hoping they can work with us again. Airport in the sky, beautiful historic building. You can see it here. This is just an average day looking out at the runway. We have some transportation devices. The van we use to go to and from the airport. The eco-tour trucks we use to drive across the island and show people all the special, anything from the streams to the orchids to the wildlands to the bison. The Wrigley Memorial and Botanic Garden, it is a wonderful garden. It is definitely geared towards Mediterranean or drier plants, but we think it's just a wonderful way to spend a couple hours when you're on the island. We were enhancing it with new signage and new learning opportunities when people were in that. This is a close-up of the trailhead, our new visitor center. It's as you get off the boat, it's one of the first things you see when you enter town. That was pivotally important for us. Upstairs we have a restaurant run by a Blue Water Grill. They have one in town here called Toy on Grill. Downstairs we have the information where we do everything from talk to you about membership, teach you how to use the island almost like a visitor center. We have this 26-foot picture of the island so you can really look in micro detail of what's on the island. And then we have a retail side that all relates to our mission. I talked about the military work of the roads, so this is the military at action. For the airport, they had about 115 Marines that came to the island, and for this project, I believe they had about 51 Marines that came to the island, and they work like ants. They work hard, they work effectively, and they did a great job for us. We worry about a lot of road work. We worry about shade structures when you're on the island. Very few places to sit down in the shade, very few places to take a break. So we've added about 20 shade structures over the last 3 years. So when you're hiking the trails of the island, you can find a spot to sit down, relax, have your drink of water. And then we've added water to about 5 locations so someone can fill up a canteen as they walk. We do a lot of property management. This is just an example of one of our towers where we have communications. That's every plane that lands at LAX. One of the signals that monitors that plane is on our island. The DEA watches all ocean-bound drug enforcement from our island. The FBI has a connection. The LA County Sheriff has a connection. LA County Fire has a connection. So our communications towers are really pivotal to the infrastructure of the Los Angeles, Orange County area. But we have our rangers. They're out there just to be helpful, to make sure people are safe, to make sure people don't dehydrate. Dehydration is the biggest issue they have. When they're walking the island, they underplan how much water they would need. And then our guest service staff, they're there just to provide a great guest experience. Like I said, this slide is a little older where it says 250,000 guests. We think we probably will pass 300,000 guests in our trailhead this year, just because we're having a great seasonal growth through COVID. I told you about our volunteer groups, how important to us they are. They do many, many things. Apple stole our picture when they came out with their last software. If you happen to have an Apple computer, you'll notice this view of Catalina. So this view that they saw on our website is why they came back and took an even better picture of the same perspective. But that's Apple computer doing it only better. Imagine Catalina, I mentioned some of our long-term goals. One of the things that we're going to have to work with the state of California on is deer. They own the deer on Catalina Island. The deer are not helping us when it comes to plant growth. So we're working with them and trying to find a balance of what we can do to make that a better situation. We're doing a lot of restoration. We call it landscape scale. We do a lot of long-term monitoring. So we're protecting the underserved. You might hear that in some of the local community programs, but we worry about the plant that's near the end of its existence and maybe there's no more. The animal, the invertebrate, whatever it might be, our scientists are out there doing a lot of studies. And so we probably have, I think it's 17 plants and animals that we're actively trying to keep alive so we don't lose another species. And it's just very rewarding to see the great work and recovery that happens just by doing smart things, clearing an extra couple inches of grasses away from it, or making sure that when it populates, we take one of the samples and put it in a shaded area so it has a chance to grow. We're doing a lot of little helpful acts. We continue to pull invasive plants off the island. We take almost 200 cubic yards of invasive plants off the island every year. We restore key plants in communities, and then we're hoping at the end of the year to potentially bring a couple bison to the island. I don't know the exact timing of that, but it's getting soon. Again, when you're walking the island, the views are fantastic. Now this was spring, so a little more green in the grass, but it's the same blue ocean with a little browner grass in the summer. And that is it. So that's kind of what we're doing, where we're headed, and I figured I'd open it up for anyone who has a question. I got one over here. Yeah. The question was, there are a variety of eucalyptus trees on the island. Eucalyptus are thought to be an invasive plant, and are we going to take them out? So I'm going to tell you from the standpoint of a CEO, and I'm not a botanist, and I'm not a person that specializes in trees. Mrs. Wrigley wanted to keep her husband alive when he drove a wagon up the side of a hill. She did a lot of research before there was an internet. I would tell you those eucalyptus trees are fantastic for this health and safety of the island. One, they're deep-rooted, so they keep the road in place. Two, they're the least scattering. They don't tend to grow a lot of offshoots. They also have less fire danger than most eucalyptus. So she picked a tree, I believe it was out of New Zealand, and I'm sorry, I normally know this, I just don't remember tonight. But those trees line the main road out of town, and those absolutely keep that road in better shape than if they weren't there. We are not replacing eucalyptus, but we think that the fact that they're there, and many of them have kisses on them, big marks. Every time there's a kiss, that means someone ran into that tree. And you'll see 60, 70 times somebody's life was probably saved because of those eucalyptus trees. So I think they're great. And we could put fence posts up the side, we could do a lot of other things. But right now, unless we see damage or danger from those eucalyptus trees, we're going to let them live their life. And eucalyptus trees only have about 120 years to live. So it could be we're going to start losing them soon. But it is something we look at, and we're pretty happy with them so far. But we're not adding more, you're right.
But they do make good firewood.
They make great firewood, yes. Well, good point, yes.
Are there snakes on the island?
Okay, the question was, are there snakes on the island? And yes. And one of the exciting things is we just found 4 two-striped garter snakes. We have not found one in 6 years. We found 4 this year. So we're really excited. Garter snakes don't hurt you. They live in kind of the wetter areas of the island, but it tells us that there's a breeding population. It tells us that the snake still exists. There are some rattlesnakes, not many, but
There are rattlesnakes.
there are rattlesnakes.
Yes, I was going home one night, and I heard this going like this. And I lived out at Hamilton Beach.
Yes.
And like this, and I didn't know what to do. So I went back, and I walked over the rocks in the middle of the night with the ocean coming like that to get over that, and scared the hell out of me.
No, and she was just talking about how the rattlesnake scared her. The rattlesnakes that are there tend not to shake with the same sound other rattlesnakes. They tend to be a little bit smaller. They're definitely venomous, so they are dangerous, and you need to worry about that type of thing. But the reality is, normally the people who find rattlesnakes are the people that stop thinking about what they were doing. It's a Boy Scout who sticks his hand in a pile of rocks. It's the camper that laid down next to a pile of straw or something like that. I have seen in 8 years, and I walk miles on that island just because it's my sort of day off way to understand the property. I've only seen 3 rattlesnakes in 8 years, and I bet I put on hundreds of miles every year. So they're there, but there's not many. And you can't ship lumber and supplies and heavy-duty equipment and not think some animal's going to sneak on that barge. And I think that's probably how they got there.
Are you having a sea urchin problem like much of California?
I didn't hear the word.
Sea urchin problem, and how are the abalone doing?
Well, I learned the island as a diver. So I came to the island 40 times as a diver, living on the mainland side. And I can tell you that the last time I was I don't dive regularly anymore because it's cold now, but last time I went out, I saw abalone in the 3 spots I went in the water. That was amazing to me. I hadn't seen an abalone in a lot of years. They're not quite as big yet, but the black abalone is coming back. In fact, I just heard from Monterey Bay Aquarium. I had a meeting just this week talking to them, and they said in the next 10 years, we're going to see a sea otter visit Catalina Island. Not to stay, but there's now enough sustainable abalone that they think they might do a visit, 1 or 2 or 3 animals. So we might see a sea otter visit Catalina. There's not enough sustainable food to keep them there, but they're moving out of the north. And with the water getting warm up there, they're kind of looking for where the cool water went, not knowing they shouldn't go south, but anyway, we might see that. The other thing is the sea urchins have taken a great turn to the improvement side. So there was a lot of people working on removing urchins, a lot of dive teams, a lot of USC-led issues where they took thousands of pounds of sea urchin overpopulations out of the sea to see if things would regrow, and they did. I'm not an expert on the marine side of the environment, but I would tell you that everyone is very happy with the progress that's being made, and it does not seem to be a serious Southern California problem right now. It's still there, but it's not going the wrong direction anymore, so everyone's fairly happy. The question was, what do I think of the Zane Grey legacy? And I have read about 200 pages of one book. That's as far as I got. I don't know much about the individual. I knew where his place was. I know he was a prolific writer. I know that my sister and parents, when I took this job, said, you got to read his books. I haven't gotten there yet. So I can't speak a lot for he as an individual or anything on that side. Well, that was a good question. What's the population of avalon during the winter? And Tony is not the guy who's going to be positive on this, but I'm going to tell you the statistics in the city say about 4,100 people live in Avalon. As a guy who lives in Avalon 4 days a week, 3 days a week I leave the island, I would say in the winter there's about 1,200 lights on, 1,200 homes that are occupied. So there are a lot of people that use Avalon as their mailing address home, but don't stay there on the bad weather days. But when you're in Avalon, you're always feeling good. So, I don't know the exact number. I'm just going to give you, that's my guess.
Are any of the Wrigleys still alive?
Absolutely, and you're sitting next to some on both sides of you.
Well, good, because we lived there for a long, long time. I met my husband there, we went to high school there and school, and we love that place. And I would be delighted to move back. But one time, we moved out to the old airport. It's along the coast, just, I guess,
The beach.
on the beach. That was the best place I ever lived. It was gorgeous. You could go out any time of the day and night. We did a lot of night stuff, swimming and skinny dipping.
Oh boy.
A lot of your dependence is on fresh water.
Yes.
Do you desalinate, or are you drilling any water wells?
We are not drilling additional water wells. We know that the island's health is contingent upon not drying up the water within it. Edison has been good in that they've been running the desalinators at a much higher level. They have two. They don't necessarily run them together, but they run one or the other. They're producing, I think the number these days is about 48,000 gallons a day.
That's a good water well.
That's a good water amount. There's only, as the last I heard, 11 days that they could not make enough water to keep up. And so the desalinators are helping us greatly. Our hope is that they put another well in the ground so they have more seawater source, and that they change their permit so they can run both desalinators at the same time. That brings them all the way up to about 80,000 gallons a day. So the salt in a desalinator, basically about 9% of the water stays fresh water. About 91% of the water goes back into the ocean. And it is a slight bit saltier, but I, as a marine diver, I would tell you that you see no difference near the desalinators, but again, a scientist who understands that better would be your best source of that. But the desalinators, in my opinion, are a wonderful addition to especially the city of Avalon. It gives us a water source, it improves the water quality, and in this drying world, it would really, we'd be upside down if we did not have those units operating. The question was, explain the state owning the deer. So right around the early 1900s, 500 deer were brought to the island, or not 500, 200 deer were brought to the island. The idea was they were potentially going to be a hunted animal, something that the island still allowed some hunts and things like that. Those deer are owned by the state of California. So if the mule deer that they relocated and the state did the work and put them on Catalina, it was a benefit to them to reduce the population. But once they're on the island, I as a landowner and any other landowner do not have rights to touch those animals. They are owned by the state of California. So we're trying to work with the state of California, who agrees with us there's too many deer on the island and they're not a healthy deer because there's not a great spot. And you'll see deer in the city of Avalon eating trash, eating grass, eating all the plants that are not healthy for them every night. So we're trying to find a balance. What do we do? Do we put them on some sort of a birth control? Do we do something like culling some of the herd? Do we do something like putting a fence up? You know, all the options will be on the table. And we've been on this for about 9 months now. And we're working with the state to see what the next step will be. I don't know what that step will be, but the state has the ultimate authority unless they decide to gift the animals away. If they say, okay, we're going to walk away from ownership of the deer on Catalina, that would change everything. But we just have to find, again, with balance, what the right answer is to keep the island sustainable. Did that get you there? Yeah. Okay.
Couldn't they put them on one of the other islands?
Other islands have been down this path.
No, they're not, people don't live on it. So why not put the deer there?
We would love the state of California to do that. And if any of you have a boat and want to take one home, we're not going to raise our hands. So what is our relationship with the National Park Service? So we are a collaborative group and believe in working with all the Channel Islands, both in Mexico and California. We work with the National Park Service, we work with the Navy, we work with the Nature Conservancy. We share a lot of information. Many of the plants that they're having trouble on some of the northern Channel Islands are actually growing on our island, and we're giving them the source, not leaves, but the offshoots to regrow on their island. So we have a lot of collaborative efforts. We're now working with the Channel Islands on the Argentinian ant. We just found out that we have shrew on our island, small population, not many anymore, but everywhere we went to go investigate the shrew, in I think it was 14 or 17 locations, we found Argentinian ants, and they're just terrible eaters. They just eat up everything. They're sort of like putting a vacuum cleaner on dust. It's just they eat anything in their pathway. So we're thinking that could be taking our shrew population down. So we're starting to work with people on that. We have a couple university partnerships that we just brought to the island in the last 2 months. We'll have more information. But then I just found out today in talking with the Channel Island Museum that, you know, the Argentinian ants becoming common on all the Channel Islands. And so we'll start collaborating and learning more. But always something in science that you have to be smarter on the next year.
What is a shrew?
A shrew is a mouse-like creature that has to eat when it's awake every 20 minutes to sustain life. Super high body turnover. They're a little mouse-like creature. They're about half the size of a typical common mouse. They live normally wherever we have our naturalized streams on the island. And we found one last year, and we hadn't found one before that, I think, for 11 years. And we've been looking, so we're trying to find more as we speak.
The island fox, you have to worry about the golden eagle, not the bald eagle.
When the bald eagle is healthy and successful in Catalina, golden eagles will not challenge them and come to the island. So although we have...
But bald eagles are usually fishing.
That's correct.
These guys are out there going after the fox.
Yes, golden eagles are not as good for the island from the guy who worries about the Catalina Island fox and even the small puppies of Avalon. You have to worry about that type of thing. Golden eagle are a bald eagle is super satisfied with the ocean environment and some of the best fishing in California. So, all right. Thank you, everyone.
We have a little gift for you. Really appreciate your talk. I want to actually thank Roger and Sarah Chrisman, who hooked us up with Tony as well, our board member. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I hope to see you back for the Kevin Short exhibit. Again, we'll run through December. Safe ride home, and hope to see you back soon. Thank you.